Welcome to the Education Innovators Podcast. I'm Eric Byron, and it is my privilege to host this show where I get to talk to folks from all over the world who are education thought leaders and innovators. We'll hear inspiring stories from educators, EdTech founders, AI experts, and others who are fearlessly innovating and delivering unique learning experiences. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started.
That is one distinction of our democracy, of course, is that the development of laws by Congress is a slow and deliberate process, right? It's not like we have somebody who could issue a mandate and says, this is the way things are going to be from now on. So we have two ends working against the middle, right? Technology is advancing at a rate that most of us can't keep up with, and yet the law progresses very slowly.
That is Leslie Gruis, a mathematician and intelligence officer for the NSA for 30 years. And she is here to talk with us about data privacy and how to protect our students from the privacy pirates. Now, she's going to say some things you don't want to hear, but you need to hear them. So keep listening. Yo ho, a pirate's life for me. Welcome to the Education Innovators Podcast. I'm Eric Byron, and today I have with me Leslie Gruis. So, born a patriot, Dr. Gruis spent 30 years as a mathematician and intelligence officer at the National Security Agency, where she helped develop technology solutions that balanced national security with civil rights. She later served as a U.S. Cyber Command and the National Intelligence Council. She's now retired, but she writes and speaks on privacy, surveillance, and democracy, making complex topics accessible for everyday Americans. Dr. Gruis is the author of Privacy, Past, Present, and Future, The Privacy Pirates, which I have read, and a forthcoming third book. So she's also mentoring K through 12 STEM students with a special focus on middle school girls. Leslie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Eric. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be really fun. So I'll have to admit, reading your book, Privacy Pirates, was a little bit convicting. So even though I spent my career in technology and was even responsible at one point for corporate data security, and I feel like I should be pretty knowledgeable about protecting myself online. But reading your book, I realized I'm still making a lot of mistakes and doing things I probably shouldn't be doing. And so your book taught me to pay more attention. So I'm curious. So how has the response been to the book? And is it having the kind of impact you are hoping it will have?
So the book has been out for a couple years now. I talk to people who have read it and are impressed by it. I've had some schools ask me about it. I've given some university talks at equally time-shifted hours to the one we're doing tonight. It has not become a bestseller, and that might be why we're on this podcast tonight, is I'm trying to popularize my thinking, not because I'm greedy, but really because I think privacy is such an important element. And I guess the one message I want everyone to take away is that privacy is really essential to democracy, right? When our forefathers created our country and wrote our Constitution and came up with the Bill of Rights, privacy was implicitly there. The word wasn't there, but it was implicitly there in all the rights that the individuals reserved from control from the government. And so if we don't have those controls over government into things like free speech, right? Our free speech, our right to be free from search and seizure and things like that, then we have no control over what our democracy does.
Yeah, well, I thought there was a really interesting distinction, though, in there. So the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all these things, and you gave a great kind of historical view of how these things came about and evolved over the history of the United States anyway. But you make a good distinction there that this was really all written from the perspective of kind of protecting the citizens from the government. but not from corporations, right? That this is a whole kind of new issue with these large tech companies and folks that are gathering and using our data, and the Bill of Rights and whatever doesn't really protect us from them. So talk a little bit about that and what you see happening. Is the onus just on the individual now to protect themselves from corporates? How do we protect ourselves?
Well, so Eric, there's a long story there, and I'll spare you the details. But if you had dug into the first book, I actually talk about how government addressed the rise of large corporations and banks. Right? We all know about the robber barons and the Standard Oil case and things like that. Obviously, the stock market crash in 1929 led to a lot of banking laws, right, that are with us today, the creation of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The Federal Trade Commission was actually created in the 19 teens and empowered more in succeeding decades. And they're really the people that have been at the forefront of consumer privacy. So, having worked for the government, I can tell you, I don't worry. I worry far less about my privacy when it comes to the government than I worry about what companies are doing with my private data.
Mm,
And I am guilty as anyone else is in terms of trading off privacy for convenience, right? If you want to buy a book, what's the easiest way to buy a book today? Well, you get on Amazon and you have them send it, right? So, just as an experiment, I once asked Amazon to find me a book. I think it was on 16th century Spanish trade. And it found me a book. That wasn't a problem. But several years later, when there was a new book released on a related topic, it remembered that I had asked about that topic a couple years earlier. And so this is typical of what we see with these big companies. You also see it in social media, and I'm a great social media issuer, except for LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn, but I don't use any of the other social media platforms just because I don't want to volunteer a lot of private information about myself and my family and what we're doing. I don't think it's appropriate on social media. So you're very right. The law has not kept up with the companies, particularly with the technology-based companies.
yeah,
That is one distinction of our democracy, of course, is that the development of laws by Congress is a slow and deliberate process, right? It's not like we have somebody who can issue a mandate and says this is the way things are going to be from now on. So we have two ends working against the middle, right? Technology is advancing at a rate that most of us can't keep up with, and yet the law progresses very slowly. And that's always been true. That's been true since the time, for example, in communications of the telegraph, right? Where all of a sudden the telegraph came along and nobody really thought about privacy and the telegraph. And then all sorts of things started happening, and the government kind of realized maybe we have a problem here. And then the telephone came along, right? And
yeah.
so there's this whole evolution in the communications arena in terms of how the law evolved. And when you study the history, the answer is the law evolved very slowly.
And it's
So
very
it's not
reactive,
surprising.
right?
Very reactive, yes.
Yeah,
And of course, in order for Congress to pass a law, there has to be a public interest in the subject, right? So national affairs can drive the progression of law, right? If you have something like a crisis, like 9/11, it's really easy to pass laws that are related to national security because the crisis is at hand. Right now, nobody senses a crisis, and so that's why we don't have any new federal privacy law today.
yeah.
Does that answer your question, Eric?
It does, yes. And I recall now too from the book that you pointed out that quite often when these laws do come out, they're very industry specific. So like banking and insurance, or you know I've forgotten what some of the other examples were where laws were enacted based on a very specific industry scenario that they were trying to protect the public from and enforce. better behavior on the part of business. So that is one approach, but you're right. It's so big, and I think on the parts of these corporates intentionally, masked, and they don't openly steal your data and monetize it. They don't want to talk about that, right? So it's very quiet. It's very kind of behind the scenes, and we're not necessarily aware of what's happening there. Is that a fair
Yeah,
statement?
and corporate behavior doesn't change, right? It's all about their self-interest, right? And their self-interest is making money and making the board of directors happy,
Yeah,
right? So that's the bottom line. It's easy.
yeah. So what's an example of how, so let's just we'll pick on Meta and Facebook. So how do they monetize this? So I post, pictures from my trips or my, family stuff or whatever. I use it very much socially, right? It's how I stay in touch with former coworkers and family members. So how does Facebook monetize my data?
So let's take an example. What really probably troubles me the most with what some of the social media platforms are doing, and Facebook or Meta is a perfect example, is the way they monetize activity of minors on Facebook, right? So they have things that are smart enough, AI engines that are smart enough to analyze how a customer or a consumer or an adolescent is feeling, right? So they'll watch the thread and they'll say, oh, here's a girl, she's got a self esteem problem. Oh, she's looking at diet sites or whatever. She thinks she's fat, right? And what they will do is they will use those behavioral profiles. I would call them target profiles or dossiers, really.
Okay.
And they will monetize her behavior by presenting ads to her that will be appealing to her in her current state of mind. And this is very, very distressing. And there's been a lot of reporting on this by whistleblowers. I very much hope that the government will take this in hand more than it has been able to so far. We're seeing some movement in the Commonwealth nations. The UK has only recently passed a law to restrict the access of kids to smartphones and social media. Australia has already passed a law in this respect. We have not been able to update the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act that originated late in the 1990s. And it's due for renewal. It's due for a good, steady look at it and an update to protect our kids better. And since I tutor so much, not just STEM, but I also tutor English because I do a lot of SAT tutoring.
Okay.
I see. I see the effects that the social media has on the kids. And sometimes, especially for those, 11, 12, 13-year-old, it's really kind of scary to see the behaviors that come out of that. And it's not just Meta, right? It's TikTok, it's Roblox, it just kind of goes on and on. And so that's how they're monetizing these children's emotional woes. Does that answer your question,
Yeah,
Eric?
talk to me about Roblox specifically. I'm curious on that one. What do you see
Okay, so
happening?
there's a great article in the IEEE Privacy or Security and Privacy magazine last month about and how it's being used to launder money and to recruit kids to do things. And it's got some very explicit content. You would say it was pornographic if it had real people in it, but it only has, avatars, as it
Yep.
were. It's a very persuasive article. I have a student right now who I'm kind of concerned about, and she is spending her time on Roblox beating people up. She thinks that's a good use of her time. I think there's probably
Like
something more there.
cyberbullying, beating people up? Is that what we're talking about?
No, physically beating people up with her
Oh,
avatar.
oh, okay. That's, yeah, interesting.
So there's some very disturbing things going on these, even on these platforms that are ostensibly for kids.
Yeah. So part of my interest in the Roblox one, I haven't spent a bunch of time on Roblox, but I had a guest on the show who's actually doing science curriculum, converting textbooks to Roblox. So the kids go in and they kind of play through the game, but they're actually learning the content. And in order to progress, they have to answer questions. So there's kind of a quiz-based assessment piece to it, but it's all done in Roblox, and it was quite
There's a lot of
creative.
things
Yeah,
out
yeah.
there. A lot of things out there right now. I'm most interested, and I'm not proficient at Roblox. I haven't spent a lot of time there, but I am interested in learning more about the new curriculum that the Khan Academy has released, Conmigo,
Mm.
right, with
I
an
did an episode
AI
on that
engine.
too. Yeah,
Okay. So I think there are some good uses of AI out there, but there are some really scary things that kids are able to do with them.
yeah. Well, let's talk more about this. So one of the things, and we've heard OpenAI, Sam Altman admit that the top use case now for these AI chatbots is companionship. And we're seeing more and more of this, certainly in the teen group. And in fact, I had another guest on recently here who talked about the kind of conundrum, and you talked about restricting kids' use of or access to their phones when they're at school. And but we're getting into this kind of difficult area now where their friends are AI chatbots. And so if you take away their phone, you've literally taken away their friends and isolated them even more. So now they're sitting in their classroom and they can't talk to their friends. So how concerned are you about this? And again, this topic just keeps coming up on my podcast. Almost every guest, it
They're
seems.
actually not supposed to be talking to their friends. They're supposed to be studying at school, right?
Well, I agree, but so what this last guest made the comment to me was, if I went to work and somebody said, you can't send and receive text messages while you're at work because you're supposed to be working, this would be very isolating. And, you'd almost consider it kind of a hostile work environment, right? If somebody said, yeah, you can't, talk to your
Well,
people, during the
so
day.
so actually, when I worked in the intelligence community, we did not have access to our phones during the day. So there were no text messages in my life.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to call me on the phone, you could call me and talk to me. But we did not have text messages. I seem to have survived the occasion somehow.
Yes, yes. Well, it's a different generation too. I mean, I obviously, am in the same age group as you, I think. And for these kids, it's different. But I'm very concerned about the fact that the companies that are putting out these chatbots that these kids are getting on and developing relationships with, they're they're just interested in money. They're not necessarily trying to protect these kids, you know, mental health and wellness, right? And so there's a lot of fear that these kids are getting into inappropriate conversations. And to your kind of side of this, maybe sharing all kinds of information with these chatbots that they shouldn't be sharing, private information, maybe information about family finances or who knows. So do you see anything happening there in terms of regulatory or education wise, where we're trying to educate teens to be more careful about these interactions and what they share?
So that's an interesting question. Let me answer it this way. I do not see any promising things happening at the federal level because there's a lot of turmoil in the government right now.
Mm,
So I don't think we can count on that. I am very concerned that the Federal Trade Commission, which has traditionally protected consumer privacy and also done antitrust law has will be declawed under this administration, and there will be less regulation, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes regulation is a good thing because it puts privacy protections in there. The most recent example that we've been all watching is the sale of 23andMe's data, right? That is really a scary scenario, and thank goodness I didn't 23andMe, right? But somebody needs to step up to the plate and say this is not okay. So, with that said, I think the schools are responding to some extent by banning the use of cell phones, at least during school hours. We're seeing that in a lot of jurisdictions now. So, that's not a bad thing. You have to think about, though, if we all remember what COVID was like, right? When we didn't have that in-person human contact and how weird it was, right? Even if you were locked up in your household with your family, which I was, but you weren't seeing other people and you weren't socializing and you weren't having dinner with friends and you weren't meeting people for drinks. After that was over, everybody craved human to human interactions, right? That's something that's really essential to our well being and our mental health. We're social animals. So when you look at these kids who lived through COVID and all this, and perhaps got in the habit of living only in the virtual world and not in the real world, and now you're telling me about their virtual friends, that makes me worry even more. Because how are these people going to have adult relationships? How are they going to get on with other individuals in the workplace? How are they going to have a spouse, a family, have a relationship with their kids, right? All these are skills that we develop during childhood and into adulthood for that matter, right? And that development was arrested for them because they've turned to the virtual world of social media
Yeah.
or these companions.
Yep. So, and I guess I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I'll waffle a little bit and say I absolutely agree with you. We need to have times of human contact and in a school setting or in a work setting, right? I've been in meetings where we've been instructed, put your phone away, right? Put your laptop down, right? We want to focus on each other in conversation, look me in the eye, right? And let's talk about something. And so I think these kids have to learn to do that. I do think, though, that banning them for the whole school day may have a counter negative effect, right? That a rebellious kind of effect. And I'm even hearing that parents are saying, no, 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 you can't take my kid's phone away for the whole day because I may want to get a hold of them. I may need to reach my kid. You're isolating them from me as well, right? When you do that, I want to message them. I want to hear from them during the day, right? To know they're safe. So I think we have to strike a balance there and figure out a full ban, I think is probably counterproductive, but some kind of emphasis, and some of this is training too. It's teaching the kids when it's appropriate to use your phone and when you should focus on human interaction and peer-to-peer, relationships with real people. Yeah.
So one of the surreptitious things about smartphones and social media, as we all know, they're very addictive, right? It's really easy to withdraw into your phone, and there are times that I need to just be left alone with my phone or a good TV show and just chill out, okay?
Yep.
I don't begrudge people that. But the problem, and there are several books on this subject, there's a wonderful book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, who's at NYU. There's another very recent book called The Tech Exit that talks about basically digital detox for your kids.
Hmm.
right? They're very addictive. And since these kids are young, they haven't developed all of those executive function skills that grown-ups have, right? Their frontal lobes aren't developed, so they can't resist an impulse to look at the phone, right? It's very hard for them because they don't have that impulse control. And so what this addiction to phones does is it undermines any progress they might have been making in impulse control and makes it worse, right? And you read, the experts on this, and I'm not one of them, but there's this long discussion about the parallels between cell phone use and social media use and addictive behaviors, right? If you get into an addiction, then those neural pathways are made that crave that addiction, that induce you to keep doing it again and again and again. And you can't just erase it, right? It's a learned behavior. And so it's really scary to look at these kids and think, wow, they're going to have to unlearn all that if they're ever going to be able to like be a grown up in a workplace,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
So
I know
that's
a lot of
that's one of the
adults,
reasons.
a lot of adults who are addicted too. And I don't know, I'm in Hong Kong, but I can tell you when you move around in Hong Kong, in fact, I have had the experience sitting on the train here during a commute and not having my phone in my hand. And you look around and everyone else is, phone right here. And I've had people kind of look up at me and almost be like uncomfortable, like, why are you looking around, at people, you should be looking at your phone. You know, it almost makes people uncomfortable that I'm not looking at my phone. So, yeah, so it's not just a problem with kids being addicted to their devices. I think a lot of adults don't have the executive control functions
Yeah, I
necessarily
get that.
themselves
But
to
you know
turn it
what?
off.
Our goal is to raise, emotionally strong kids, right? That'll be prepared to join the world and be responsible citizens and be able to contribute to society in whatever way. And we're doing them a great disservice right now with this stuff.
Yeah.
As for the looking at phones, I think that's probably true in a lot of places. If you had spent any time with me in person, you would know that I always have a book.
Yes.
I'm a reader.
Yeah.
So nobody wastes my time because I always have a book with me. I can always read another chapter and I'm perfectly happy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. I'm getting ready to go on a trip myself, and I have I have one physical book and some ebooks I'm going to be reading while I'm traveling. So I can't haul the whole library around with me in the suitcase, but I am an avid reader also.
Let's take a quick commercial break. I want to plug the human intelligence movement. No, this is not a paid advertisement. This is just something I'm passionate about. I love the work that they're doing. The mission of the human intelligence movement is to ensure that students have the skills to thrive and succeed in an AI world. This is so important. And so I've got a link in the show notes. I encourage you to find them and join the movement. All right, now back to our conversation with Leslie. She is going to give us some really practical things we can do to protect ourselves and protect our data. So keep listening. Some of this is scary, but I promise it'll be worth it.
So let's talk about something else that was in your book. You kind of highlighted, if you will, 8 fair information practices, and you gave us these kind of guiding principles. Can you highlight just maybe a couple of those and talk about why the fair information practices are important, what they mean to us as individuals?
Okay, well, if you'll allow me to digress a little bit and talk a few minutes about how we got there,
Sure.
it will help illustrate how hard it is to get federal laws in place. So, in the 1950s, after World War II, computers, like all the other industry that was wartime industry, got privatized to the civilian world. And one of the industries that got privatized were computers, right? So 1951, the government takes delivery on its first peacetime computer, right? It was a UNIVAC 1, in case you remember that back that far. It was as big as a warehouse. I mean, it was huge, right? But the point is, it was delivered to the Census Bureau, a very logical place to send your first computer. But at that time, Congress started talking about what happens when we computerize all these records? What happens to the privacy of our citizens? And there was a discussion about this throughout the 50s. Nothing successfully happened, but it was discussed throughout the 50s. Time went on. We had the civil rights movement in the 1960s. The world changed again, right? 1967, we get the Freedom of Information Act, finally, right? Our first privacy law concerning the privacy of U.S. citizens' information held by the government, right? It wasn't everything everybody wanted in a privacy act, but it was a good start, okay? 1970, the first privacy law was passed that did not apply to the federal government, the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And I only mention that because credit reporting became possible in the 1950s because of computers, right? And credit cards as we know them today emerged in the 1950s. So finally, by 1970, the government had actually passed a law to protect the privacy of people's credit records, right? So that was a huge step in 1970. Then a bunch of stuff happened in the early 70s, very unpleasant things. The end of the Vietnam War, Richard Nixon, Watergate,
Yeah.
the Church Committee, the Pike Committee, blah, 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 on and on. 1974, finally, the Privacy Act is passed, which has more teeth than FOIA, right? And that's really where the FIPS come in, the Fair Information Practices or Fair Information Privacy Practices. And so there was a study that was done in 1973 that looked at the privacy issue. It's a wonderful read. And the FIPS were actually lifted from this 1973 report. And they kind of underlie all the privacy and security rules that you find today. It's the first stab at trying to write these things down. So, for example, one of the FIPS says there can't be any secret databases of information about people, right? They all have to be stated and acknowledged. And so even today, these systems of record, every time one is created, get publicized in the congressional report. I can't remember. Congressional record. They get published in the congressional record, right? So the government's not allowed to have any secret databases. Well, that, of course, was a response to J. Edgar Hoover and all the things he had done, because he had dossiers on everybody, right, including members of Congress, as a matter of fact. So we didn't want to do that anymore. Unfortunately, J. Edgar Hoover died in 1972, so we never got to hear his testimony on what he was up to, unfortunately. But that was why that was one of the reasons that was put into place, right? And so not only that, but you have the right to challenge the content, right? If the content is wrong, you have a right to be able to see the content. And you also have a right to be able to say, that's wrong. You have to correct that, right? And so these are very much in the same vein as the Fair Credit Reporting Act of 1970. These are not big surprises, right? So these FIPS, I think the original FIPS were like 5. And now if you go to like the FTC website, I think there's like 8 listed. You go here, you go there. They're all slightly different, but they're vaguely the same. You have to guarantee the protection of the information that you hold. So there's your security, right? Your confidentiality, your integrity, and your availability, right? That's where those all come from, is from these FIPS that were written so long ago
Yeah.
and keep reappearing, but in different incantations today.
Yeah.
Does that
But I
answer your
know
question?
it well does, yes. And but I also know, right? We still see that. It amazes me that we still see this over and over again, where there'll be a news item that says, "Oh, so and so got hacked, and 1 million customers' data, was stolen." So on the corporate side, right, this is still a problem. Companies collect all this information, and then either they sell it without your knowledge, or somebody hacks their system and steals it. So what can we do? How do you kind of protect yourself more from, this problem?
So I try to be careful about what I share online, but with that said, of course, once the genie's out of the bottle, it's out of the bottle, right? So you can't take it back. There's no taking your private information back. I try to be very conscious about what I do. One thing I'm really been writing a lot about lately is school issued laptops. I really worry about the privacy of students and their information on school issued laptops. And there's a huge debate brewing in the United States about this right now. We seem to have gotten ourselves into this mindset that everybody's entitled to a laptop or a tablet, right? It's like an entitlement, like Social Security is an entitlement, right? That's the way some people seem to think about it. And yet, there are no studies that I've been able to find that really say, oh, well, this is really going to benefit our kids for all these reasons because we assessed it and we did an experiment and here are the statistics. None of that. Everybody's got this mindset that, oh, they all have to have laptops because it's an entitlement and it will level the playing field for everyone. Well, I'm not so sure about that. And on top of that, I'm really concerned about the privacy of the information that the kids might put on the laptop. So when you go to get your laptop at the beginning of the school year, the parent and the child both sign for the laptop. And somewhere in the details of signing for the laptop, it says the school is basically entitled to monitor all activity on the laptop. Now, I don't know about you, but that kind of freaks me out when I think about a school monitoring my child's behavior on their laptop. And there are any number of terrifying stories that have bad endings related to this. Parents just don't seem to think about that.
Okay.
I just really don't get it.
So
So one
to
thing you could do
counter,
is just say no, right? I won't take your laptop, period.
but doesn't that create a real problem for the student? So if the school's policy is, the students get laptops or a tablet and their assignments are based on their ability to do that, and then a parent says, no, my kid's not going to take a school issued device, right? How do they do their assignments? How do they
Well, so
study?
there's a lot of alternatives, and some of the books I've mentioned actually talk about this. You can use a home computer to access the assignments. Okay, that's good and bad, right?
Yeah.
You can insist that they come in hard copy or that they maybe they're made accessible to the parent, right? Instead on the computer. I would still just say no because I don't think this is a norm that I can live with and I don't think it's a norm that parents should be willing to live with for the kids because it goes on, right? Now they have a laptop, now they monitor the kids' behavior. If you want a really scary story, go watch the Amazon Prime miniseries called Spy High, where they monitor the behavior of a 15-year-old boy in his bedroom and take photographs. So there's a lot of alternatives here. And this kind of flows with another theme that I've been thinking a lot about, and that's about reading online versus reading a physical book. So, like I told you, Eric, if you were to meet me for lunch, I would have a physical book with me, right? Because if you were late or held up in traffic or whatever, I would just sit down and read my book. I would be happy as a clam. If I was just sitting there wasting my time, I would probably be pretty PO'd with you when you finally got there, right? But I'm not. I'm a really nice person when you get there because you rewarded me with reading time.
Yeah.
Okay. There's another book I just finished recently called Reader Come Home. And it talks about how when you read a physical book, you tend to read more deeply than when you read online. So when you read online, the content, your understanding of the material, according to the experiments, and I'm not a scientist in this subject, but according to the studies, you read much more superficially. And I think I can give you an example of that. I don't know about you, but when I get up in the morning, I spend an hour sort of going through the headlines and reading the articles I want to read. And I try to read a diversity of sources so I kind of get everybody's point of view. And I read some UK papers to see, what our brethren think the crazy Americans are doing this week and on and on. And if you start to read an article, just think about it the next time you do it. You might read the headline and you say, oh, that sounds interesting. So then you read the first paragraph and you say, oh, that's really interesting. And then you notice as you read further and further down, you read like the topic sentence and the last sentence of the paragraph, and then you skip to the next paragraph, right? That's superficial reading, right? And you realize it after a while, right? If you've read quite far down, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I stopped paying attention like 7 paragraphs ago. I got to go back,
Right.
right? That online presentation encourages this kind of superficial reading, whereas a hard copy book actually encourages deeper reading. So, in point of fact, we're teaching our kids to read poorly by doing all their work online, right? And it's really not surprising that US reading scores are lower than much of the rest of the world,
Yeah.
right? So so I think that answers your question is I would hold the line and say, nope, they're not going to have a school issued device and you're going to have to figure something else out.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Anyway, I don't know if I agree or disagree, but it's
But like I said,
yeah,
I read a
it's a
lot,
hard one.
so I've
Yeah.
given you the book titles. You
Yes,
can go read
yes.
them and make your own assessment.
Yes, no, I agree. The world is evolving so fast, right? And I think this is the challenge for all of us, right? And I think generationally, well, I certainly experience this. I go to a lot of kind of workshops and events around town and work with some of the universities locally here. And so, but just talking with these folks who are now, you know, 40 years younger, right? In university, and their perspective on technology and this sort of thing is very, very different than our perspective necessarily. And so I hate to just say they're wrong, that they're being shortcutted, or that this is all bad. I believe there are positive things to the use of technology, and but you have a very unique perspective because you've been in this space and focused on the security and the privacy issues, which honestly, and this is what kind of scared me in the book, is the realization that even in my life, where I kind of came up through the development of much of this technology and went through phases of my career where I was responsible for protecting corporate data and privacy and dealing with laws like Sarbanes-Oxley, those kind of things that were targeted to companies to get them to secure their systems so we couldn't get hacked and manipulate the books or whatever kind of thing. But I still feel like I don't do a good enough job after reading your book of worrying about my own privacy and my own data and what I put out in the world and how it can be manipulated. Did you happen to see, I sent some stuff to your assistant there, Michaela, about, well, there were two of them. One of them was from LinkedIn, a lady who's talking about the way these companies are now using these algorithms not only to target particular products and services to you, but to dynamically adjust pricing. So kind of your comment about, right, kind of seeing your state of mind. They're using algorithms now to try and figure out what price I'm likely to be willing to pay for something. And so you might go in and you're kind of calm and they can tell, oh, she's got no sense of urgency. We got to keep the price low. And then I may be going in and they're looking at me going, oh, he needs this now. Jack the price up 20% because he'll just pay it because he really needs this. So how concerned are you about, those kind of trends as well? And then of course the other one was kind of a silly video, but it certainly was poignant to what you've been talking about. And the example I think was Google buying a pizza delivery company, and then this person's on the phone with them to order a pizza, and they seem to know everything about them, their health records, their financial records, their, all their history of purchases and everything. And it's done in kind of a comic way, but yeah, we get the point, right? These companies know a lot about us and have access to all kinds of information we probably wish they didn't know.
So do you want me to respond to that?
Yes.
So as for the dynamic pricing, Michaela, actually that was the first heard from me at 12:30 today. So I haven't dug into it, but I can tell you an interesting story. And the interesting story is many years ago, apparently, the Australian airline Qantas was using an AI agent doing something, and somebody was smart enough to lead the AI agent down the garden path, and the AI agent finally agreed with this customer online to give them a first class airplane ticket for 80% off. And then he told all his friends.
How he did it, right?
So,
Yeah.
okay, so the case went to court, and the customer's rights were upheld, and they got the 80% off first class ticket. The point being that even though they are perhaps using sentiment analysis to determine how much you're willing to pay, use of AI agents isn't necessarily robust. There are some liability problems there. And if you're clever, you can actually mislead these AI agents and get them to do things that the company doesn't want you to do.
Yeah.
So think about that in response to your dynamic pricing. I haven't looked into the dynamic pricing, but I am not at all surprised.
Yeah.
What
Well,
was the other subject that, oh, they know everything about me because I ordered a pizza?
right. You're trying to
Um,
order a pizza, and yeah, and yes, they're
so
trying to
that
get
is
you to eat a
true.
vegetarian one because they know your cholesterol is high and that you haven't renewed your prescription, for your
Okay.
cholesterol medication.
So
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure we're quite there yet.
Yeah.
We did put up a line, we did put up a wall with HIPAA and the High Tech Act. So presumably your health information is supposed to be a little bit better protected than what Google does with your data, or Amazon does with my data, or Meta does with my students' data. And you've got some teeth there to defend yourself with, right?
Yeah.
Right. That would be a clear violation of HIPAA. And so I think healthcare providers are very conscious of that. One thing that I do worry about, and this was something that I saw at the Consumer Electronics Show a couple of years ago, was the use of cognitive headsets. Right, these cognitive headsets. So it's like an EEG, except it goes on your head, and it's not as complicated. It's just sort of like it's like a headband you put on your head.
Hmm.
And so these have been shown clinically to be pretty useful, pretty effective in a clinical setting for treating things like addiction or depression. But one of the things that was being advertised at the Consumer Electronics Show was putting it on all your students to monitor their level of engagement in class. And that, of course, made me freak out because I'm the privacy person, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, you can't do that because those kids, their privacy is not protected in that setting, right? HIPAA is very clear that you have to be a healthcare provider, and then HIPAA applies. But if you use it in a non-clinical, non-medical setting, then there is no HIPAA protection. So again, something to think about, worry about. Haven't seen it in the States, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But they are, in a sense, already with a school laptop able to measure your child's engagement to some extent.
Yeah. Well, this is again, an interesting kind of conundrum. I can't really educate you unless I can get you engaged. And so measuring engagement is a key critical success factor for teachers and schools in being able to deliver quality education. And so finding a way to measure a student's level of engagement is, I mean, it's not just necessary, it's like job number one almost at this point. So I can understand folks looking for, any kind of solution that helps them do that. And yes, and facial recognition systems, right, that can now analyze expressions and, emotional reactions to things. Yes, it's one of those things. It's like, oh, it'd be great and useful, but at the same time, it's an invasion of privacy because I'm recording your face all the time and looking at your reactions to things. And so, yeah, at some point we have to find that balance between our intentions are good, but our execution is problematic, and find the right way to do these things. So one thing that I thought of too, as you were talking about the pricing thing, an interesting response to the article on the post on LinkedIn, and we saw several people posting this in the comments, was possibly the counter to these AI algorithms is to use your own AI agent to interact with them, right? So instead of interacting directly, you assign your own agent to talk to their agent, so you can train your agent on how to behave, basically, so it doesn't give away emotional response or gives away the emotional response you want, right? Like the getting to the 80% discount on your flight. So, but yeah, you let your AI agent do it, and it won't give away personal information, as well. It'll only give away what it's authorized to give away. So it can't be tricked, I guess. Well, maybe it can be tricked. We know they're not as sophisticated yet, but they're getting more and more sophisticated every day. It's amazing what some of these things can do. So, all right, any other thoughts, anything we didn't cover you were hoping we would cover in this conversation?
I guess the only other thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about is girls in STEM. So let me just put in a footnote there. So there have been a lot of studies in the past that have found that we lose girls in the STEM pipeline, right? They stop having an interest or exhibiting a capability in math and science in those 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old years. And so there's been a lot of work done in that area. I feel like I've got a thimble and I'm bailing out an ocean, but I'm trying to do my little bit when I tutor, when I encounter these girls, to encourage them and give them the confidence that they seem to need in order to continue to compete in that arena. And I am their living, breathing example, right, of a woman who can be a mathematician and earn a career in that arena.
Yeah.
So it's an issue that's very near and dear to my heart.
Well, it's wonderful. And as you may know, I came from the video game industry, and this was something we worked really, really hard at too. And I did quite a bit of community outreach trying to get girls interested in STEM. And our selfish interest there was, right, we wanted more female engineers working on the games and contributing to healthier, more diverse environment. The video game industry tended to be pretty high testosterone, a bunch of young men making games, and having the input and interactions with some female engineers on the team really, really makes a difference. So I
And we
applaud you
saw,
in your thimble
oh,
work
thank you.
there.
We saw the same thing when I was at NSA, is we did not have enough women applying for mathematics jobs. And
Yep.
so there were a lot of things we ended up doing to try to recruit harder and better. And we were very successful.
Yeah.
So
Yep. It's good. Yeah, there's definitely been work there that's been effective, and say it's almost 20 years I've been at that as well, trying to encourage young girls and women to pursue careers in STEM and engineering. Yeah, it's great. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been
thank you, Eric. It was
fascinating.
delightful.
Yeah, yes, you are a wealth of information and experience there.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very interesting life you've had, I think, and the experiences. So anyway, I'm glad in
Life
your,
is
yeah.
life is never dull for me.
No, I can tell it's good, and I'm so glad in your retirement. I'm in the same boat in my retirement. I'm trying to share and contribute what I can. So I really appreciate your efforts to stay active and to use all that stuff you've learned over the years to help in a time when a lot of these kids really need a good mentor. So
Yes.
Not
Thank
a
you.
my pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Eric.
I hope you were listening carefully and came away with a sense of urgency to pay closer attention to data privacy and best practices that can protect us. So, we just can't count on the government to protect our kids. We certainly can't count on corporations to protect our kids, which means that we have to be more educated and alert when we are interacting with these online platforms. All right, I'm Eric Byron. Thanks for listening to the Education Innovators Podcast. To all of those innovators out there, thanks for doing what you do. You are making a difference.